This is going to be a bit of a convention recap show. We obviously have other stuff to do as well. But we covered night one of convention speeches, lots of speeches over the course of the 4 days. But who was snubbed were, of course, the uncommitted delegates. Democrats reject Gaza protesters' demand to give speaking slot to a Palestinian. Now, by Gaza protesters, see, the BBC didn't bother to distinguish the uncommitted delegates who were there as quote-unquote protesters inside the United Center and the protesters out on the streets who Russell was hanging out with. Those are two different groups of people. So when they say Gaza protesters here, that's a bit of a misleading headline, because these people pictured here are the uncommitteds who asked for a chance to speak. So Democrats have rejected demands from demonstrators to allow a Palestinian to speak at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Uncommitted delegates, again, not the same thing as the protesters writ large, who oppose U.S. support of Israel's war in Gaza, began a sit-in protest just outside of the arena doors on Wednesday night. So that had been night 3 out of 4. But by 6 p.m. local time on Thursday, the deadline protesters had set to hear from Kamala Harris's campaign, activists said they had not received a response to their requests for a Palestinian to be allowed to take the stage. The sit-in protest on the final night of the convention came as thousands of demonstrators outside the perimeter continued to rally against the war in Gaza and White House policy. So here's a little video by Freedom News. We're not going to play all of it. Forgive the sloppy editing job. It wasn't our editing job. But here is a little bit of the scene outside the convention halls at that sit-in protest.
As I'm scrolling through, seeing a live genocide happening before my eyes of my own people, the nightmares
of Palestinians like Rima, an elected official from Ann Arbor, the voices of Palestinians like Rua, the voices of Palestinians like Sabrine. And since we're here, let me let you in more.
Again, I don't know why they edited it that way.
A father left last week to pick up the birth certificates of his 3-day-old twins. He got back and his house was bombed. His twins were killed by U.S.-funded bombs. His wife was killed by U.S.-funded bombs. His mother-in-law killed by U.S.-funded bombs. 16,000 Palestinian children. Those could have been my children. That could have been me.
Yep. And this, we are going to play the full thing here. Watch. Palestinian American and Democratic Georgia State Representative Rua for Georgia reads the unity speech rejected by the DNC and the Harris campaign. So all of these speeches were obviously pre-written and pre-approved by the DNC, meaning, you know, Michelle Obama's speech, everybody's. And this was the speech that they had drafted, that they submitted, and that the DNC rejected. Okay, so she ends up reading it outside for the media.
It's frankly very sanitized. It was meant to
This is the lead into
have
it.
An opportunity to represent a Palestinian voice. But I'm incredibly dismayed because we came here to offer a gift. We came here to offer an opportunity to bridge the gap between our party and our voters. Because when you looked around that convention, everybody, you literally looked around, so many people wearing their pins, their kufiyas, their flags. It's very unfortunate. My name is Rua Roman, and I'm honored to be the first Palestinian elected to public office in the great state of Georgia.
That's right.
And the first Palestinian to ever speak at the Democratic National Convention. My story begins in a small village near Jerusalem called Suba, where my dad's family is from. My mom's roots trace back to Al-Khalil or Hebron. My parents, born in Jordan, brought us to Georgia when I was 8, where I now live with my wonderful husband and our sweet pets. Growing up, my grandfather and I shared a special bond. He was my partner in chief. Whether it was sneaking me sweets from a bodega or slipping me a 20 into my pocket with that familiar wink and a smile. He was my rock. But he passed away a few years ago, never seeing Suba or any part of Palestine again. Not a day goes by that I don't miss him. This past year has been especially hard, as we've been moral witnesses to the massacres in Gaza. I've thought of him, wondering if this was the pain he knew too well. When we watch Palestinians displaced from one end of the Gaza Strip to the other, I wanted to ask him, how did he find the strength to walk all of those miles decades ago and leave everything behind? But in this pain, I've also witnessed something profound. A beautiful, multi-faith, multiracial, and multi-generational coalition rising from despair within our Democratic Party. For 320 days, we've stood together demanding to enforce our laws on friend and foe alike to reach a ceasefire and the killing of Palestinians, free all the Israeli and Palestinian hostages, and to begin the difficult work of building a path to collective peace and safety.
Wow, that's really hateful. That's really divisive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Freeing all the hostages on both sides and creating a pathway to peace. You know what her mistake was? She put the word massacre in there. She called it a massacre. That's probably what they didn't like. You're not supposed to call it a massacre. That's too active, right? You're supposed to say thousands of Palestinians have been killed. The war has been devastating. To call it a massacre puts too much blame on Israel, probably. That's probably the word that did it. We'll play the rest of it in a minute, but anything for now?
I think the mistake she made was being a Democrat while Palestinian.
Yes, yeah, that's true. That's thinking big picture. You're right.
Members of this Democratic Party committed to equal rights and dignity for all.
Look at this.
What we do here
Look at how she shills now.
The world. They'll say this is how it's always been, that nothing can change. But remember, Bonnie Luhamer shunned for her courage. Yet she paved the way for an integrated Democratic Party. Her legacy lives on, and it's her example we follow. But we can't do it alone. This historic moment is full of promise, but only if we stand together. Our party's greatest strength has always been our ability to unite. Some see that as a weakness, but it's time we flex that strength. Let's commit to each other, to electing Vice President Harris and defeating Donald Trump, who uses my identity as a Palestinian as a slur. Let's fight for the policies long overdue, from restoring access to abortions, to ensuring a living wage, to demanding an end to reckless war and a ceasefire in Gaza. To those who doubt us, to the cynics and the naysayers, I say yes, we can. Yes, we can be a Democratic Party that prioritizes funding our schools and hospitals, not for endless wars.
That's right.
That fights for an America that belongs to all of us, black, brown, and white, Jews and Palestinians, all of us, like my grandfather taught me, together.
That is a speech that these pieces of garbage rejected. She gave them everything she wanted at the end. Most importantly, an endorsement. Don't forget, these are uncommitted delegates. They said, let's elect Kamala Harris. She gave you the Trump bashing thing. He uses the word Palestinian as a slur. They gave you the pro-choice bit that every Democrat apparently has to do now. She even gave you the yes, we can. She even gave you a little throwback to Obama there. Like, how much more conciliatory could that speech have been? You reject that speech. You get an endorsement from the uncommitted delegates. People who were sent there as a protest vote are prepared to give you an endorsement, and you turn them down because they mention the fact that there's a massacre in Gaza? I mean, that's what you're dealing with. And yeah, I mean, the way you put it was right on. They made a mistake of being Palestinian and a Democrat at the same time. Their mistake was asking the Democrats politely for a modicum of respect and recognition. Because they will not give it to you.
AIPAC has a complete stranglehold on both parties. Anything that is going to upset their AIPAC handlers is not going to happen. On the macro level, that is why Kamala is up there talking about how they're going to fight Iran and they're going to always defend Israel. She gave them a little nod by saying, massacre and mass slaughter for 10 months, bad.
Right.
That's bad.
Right.
And that was about it. She just threw that as a little sop to people who are too young to realize what the Democratic Party is and what it isn't yet, to give them some veil over to cover their to protect their modesty and allow them to go and vote for this genocidal warmongering party. But even right down to saying Palestinians and Jews living together in peace, which again, don't say Jews, say Israelis. That's an insult to Jewish people. Do not conflate those things. That is exactly what Israel wants you to do. And that is an example of being about as conciliatory as she could be. Because in the end, Israel cannot continue to exist as a racist apartheid state. It can continue. South Africa still exists, but it no longer has a racist apartheid government. Sure, right. Israel can exist without its current premises. Those premises need to be removed. She's not even saying that. She's essentially offering a two-state solution, which I'm sorry. She's Palestinian. She's got to know that's not workable.
Is she even offering that? Was that even in the speech? I think she just went,
well, she doesn't
let's have
say
a hostage
that,
swap and a ceasefire.
We'll live together peacefully. I mean, it sounds like she's talking the language of the two states. Right. And now, this, I don't want to go too far afield, but if you go and you read Ilan Pappé's 10 Myths About Israel, a lot of people are under the impression that with the Oslo Accords, that a proposal for a true two-state solution was on the table and it fell apart because of intransigence by Arafat and so on. They were never, even then, they were not offering a real two-state solution. The settlers were still going to be there in the West Bank. There were going to be certain areas that would be Palestinian and certain areas that would be Israeli. They were not allowed to have a military. They were not going to be allowed to have their own diplomatic services. They were essentially going to get to take care of the garbage collection and the sewage. And that was the two-state solution that was on the table with Oslo. So that was never offered. So as a Palestinian person, she's got to know it's a dead end. That was as good as it ever got. That was as good an offer as Israel ever gave. You can have a kind of Swiss cheese thing where you're nominally in charge of municipal functions.
Right. Yeah. And so just a disgraceful headline coming out of the DNC, not even a speaking slot from people who were sent there ready to endorse you. And think of what oxygen that would have taken out of the protests, right? I mean, not that the protests would have stopped, but that would have been a huge PR nightmare for the protesters who are out there rightfully, the ones who weren't polite to the Democrats, the ones who are out there rightfully in the streets. If the uncommitted delegates, the people who we ostensibly sent there, those of us who vote in Democratic primaries in the states where they actually won a couple of seats, that would have been a repudiation of the protest. It's actually kind of a disgusting thing to do, to go there and offer your endorsement. I mean, I don't want to be too hard on them, I mean, they obviously feel this very strongly, but what are you going there offering your fucking endorsement for? You should be out in the park with us.
Right. Of course.
Yeah.
That is how extreme AIPAC's ownership of the Democratic Party is. Because at the end of the day, if you look at how they played this whole thing, from whacking an incumbent president to creating an avatar out of one of the most untalented politicians ever to hold that nomination. These aren't stupid people. They had to have known that it would actually do exactly what you just said. If they put her on stage, that it would actually politically redound to their benefit. They can't piss off their AIPAC handlers.
Right.
Israel is not our client state. We are Israel's client state.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Good point, Charles. Well said. We still haven't added that to the soundboard.
Okay, now I'm back. Now I will do. We've had a lot going on the last few weeks.
Yes, that's right. No more excuses. Now we're doing it.
Please clap.